Before we get going in today's show, I just want to make you aware of something. Dr. Kathy had a chance to go to Chicago to work on a number of different book proposals for some different editors. Inside of that, she came home with some great new opportunities to create some resources for people like you and me. And in that, we're now looking, how do we build capacity for her in her schedule to have her work on these new resources? Inside of that, we're doing a year-end campaign to help fundraise for this upcoming year and some big projects that we have going on. A number of these projects are to help Kathy step off the road and work on resources. So we want to invite you to join us as Dr. Kathy follows the Lord's lead in these different areas to support us and to make God's name big in the lives of kids, to celebrate kids in many ways. So if you feel compelled today to join us in this mission that God has called us on and to be a supporter of Celebrate Kids, just visit celebratekids.com/give. And that leads me to why I started working with Dr. Kathy and why I wanted to create this podcast with her. And it comes from this idea that many times we face darkness. Every morning we get up, and especially up here in Minnesota, you get up to darkness. And as parents, it's helpful when we walk through that with other people, with friends or with people from church, or even with ministries like Celebrate Kids. Inside of that, sometimes it's a wrestle, especially for me, to know when to walk through darkness with my kids and when to walk through it for my kids. And today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in our daily segment, Facing the Dark, we're going to look at that. At what point do our kids need to know about darkness? At what point do they need to start to develop resiliency muscles? Dr. Kathy has some great insight on that, and we're going to look to her now here on the Celebrate Kids podcast.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is going to guide you, baby. Not every light is going to guide you.
So Dr. Kathy, in a recent New York Times piece, Rachel Vonora Cody wrote how she is introducing her children to books that, quote, don't ignore the dark side of life. She says, quote, it would be tempting to allow my son to believe in a world that will never betray him, but I want him to know better, end quote. She goes on to write, quote, parenting a toddler can sometimes feel like partial myth-making, as if I'm devising a narrative of the world that is true enough to approximate reality, but not so comprehensive that it becomes illegible to him. It would be tempting to banish the darkness a little longer, to allow my son to believe in a world that will never betray him. I respect him. I love him too much for that. Instead, we read Clausen, in whose works cruelty and kindness and horror and wonder reside in adamant, exquisite tension. See, I tell him, a brutal world can still be tender, end quote. So, Dr. Kathy, I really have to be honest, I really wrestle with this. What are your initial thoughts after hearing kind of her process here and her perspective?
Initial thoughts are that I don't agree. There's a place for children to understand how the world works. For believers, there's a place to begin talking about the devil and the evil one and the fact that he is here and he's cunning and smart, but he lost the battle. But I think I would much rather have children begin life believing in fairy tales and goodness. There's plenty of years to discover that they will be betrayed. So I would be fascinated in what is she afraid of? Because I don't believe a child who lives many years believing that all is well is necessarily going to freak out when he or she discovers that's not true.
Yeah, Dr. Kathy, I think that's really true. I wrestle with that a little bit because I think sometimes as parents, we parent to the place that we're in today, and we forget the development struggles that we went through, or maybe even development benefits that we went through to get to the place where we are now. What do you think the benefits are for introducing kind of darkness to our kids? Should we do that? And how should we? Or maybe even kind of when? At what point kind of developmentally or emotional, as they're growing emotionally, should we cross that bridge to talk about hard things like this?
This is fascinating. I will say what I've often said, and that is use the teachable moment. You know, if your children find out about the war in Israel, if your children find out about the death of a loved one, your children find out that a neighbor lost his job and that's why they're struggling to feed their family of 7, then you talk about it, teachable moment, when it's up close and personal. And then only if you help the kids process what that means, what that feels like. And that's where I would say, what can we do about it? So Wayne, you know that one of the questions I love to ask young people is, what are the problems you'd like to help solve? Because I don't want them to only know about problems and feel helpless and angry. I want them to realize you now can be an agent of change and victorious, Christ follower who brings light and life into that situation. So I think a benefit of introducing kids to darkness would be to let them know at the very beginning that they can play a part here. They can color a picture for a first responder who puts it on the, locker door where he has his fire suit or whatever. And that brightens that first responder's day.
What do you say then to those parents who are kind of in that place where they're constantly fighting back darkness? So maybe like me, we want to create these spaces where their kids can grow in the light, maybe a little bit longer, or I would kind of say my approach would be more build a hunger for the good, the true, and the beautiful. And the only way that you understand that is to really taste and see that it really is good. But then later on, they're obviously going to get exposed to the idea that darkness is real and that darkness kind of can shroud the light sometimes and make it really hard to see, to kind of use that metaphor. And then some of us are told that our kids aren't going to be able to handle darkness, like this journalist talks about in this piece. What would you say to parents who are doing that, really fighting back darkness? What should our perspective be here? And should we just develop some toughness, or should we develop an apologetic, or should we kind of take other people's thoughts into consideration? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a real balance, isn't it? I mean, I don't envy those of you who are parents trying to figure this out. I love this idea that you stated, that I want kids to know good, true, and beautiful so well that they hunger for it. I mean, I think that's absolutely fabulous. They should want that in their lives and in the lives of everyone around them. It's a win-win. Even the people you don't know, you should want them to know and pursue good, true, and beautiful things. So if they don't know that, they can't pursue it. So I do like that idea that that's where we would camp out, if you will. And yet I don't want to do it in a way that they feel blindsided and lied to when hard things happen. So there's the balance, right? And I'm going to go back to using personal illustrations. I would also say use the scripture. If believers are listening to us, use the scripture. Use the heroes of the faith who had good days and bad days. David comes to mind. Man, God called him a man after, God's heart, and yet he made messes, dysfunctional family guy. So there's darkness there and there's light there. And maybe, Bible heroes would be a place to go, and always talking about the hero of the good, true, and beautiful, and that would be Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Dr. Kathy. I think that's really powerful to think through it from that perspective. And I want to ask this kind of question of you, because I think that maybe some families are like ours, where we do kind of feel alone sometimes in this moment, where there is a lot of parents that are working harder and harder to expose their kids maybe to the real world or to darkness. And so there's these moments where we kind of wrestle with that darkness faucet. Do we let our kids watch that show? Well, they're going to be exposed to it anyway. Or do we let our kids have a phone? Well, you're not going to buffet them from having a phone all the time. So we kind of need to teach them about darkness and how to walk in the darkness, and there's this wrestle that I have with that. How should parents kind of hear this conversation? Is there something to buffeting the darkness, or should we have hope that our kids are going to stand strong in these moments? Or what would you kind of say as we're listening to this as moms and dads looking at our kids? How should we hear these kind of wrestles?
Yeah, I think it's both and, right? So I think we really can't avoid the dark. It's, hello, podcast title, Facing the Dark. It is there. And again, it's a matter of when and how many details and the why. I think where my mind goes as I'm listening to you is maybe we talk about the decision making and the people who are involved. So the kids understand that the good, beautiful, and true is caused by people, and the dark is caused by people who made selfish or foolish or immature decisions. They didn't love well, and therefore look at the disaster. So maybe we do a better job of talking about the cause-effect relationship between character and decision-making and outcome. And then kids are aware, not that they would be in judgment and go, oh, that person must be a foolish and mature person, Daddy, because look at what just happened. But they begin to understand that if they don't want to be known as people from the dark, then they need to be pure and they need to read the scripture and they need to be making decisions that would make Jesus look good. Yeah, this is important. And then I'm going to go back and I'll say this last, this is a personal decision, right? Like I understand we live in community and there's pressure from, work, school, and church friends. And yet I would say that parents, you must choose your values. You must decide what you believe is best. And you know what? When you have a lot of kids, it might not necessarily be best for all of them. You might have a kid on the spectrum who must be delayed in his discovery of some of this because it will be so stressful for him. Other kids who are, gifted servants already, you can see it, and they want to be out and about and making a difference, and they're young and they're ready for it. Don't parent the herd in these moments. Even though you have family values, you still might want to separate out and decide which of your kids can handle the darkness faucet.
Man, I just loved this episode talking through these issues about what parents kind of face daily. It reminded me actually of a passage out of 2 Samuel chapter 22. And I'm going to jump around a little bit, but I'm going to start reading at the beginning with verse 1. David sang to the Lord the words of this song when the Lord had delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He said, and now this is me talking, I'm going to jump down into verse 26. To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To the blameless, you show yourself blameless. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the devious, you show yourself shrewd. You save the humble, but your eyes are on the haughty to bring them low. You, Lord, are my lamp. The Lord turns my darkness into light. With your help, I can advance against a troop, and with my God, I can scale a wall. I don't know if you really need encouragement going into this weekend. I know that I do. But I will tell you something really poignant. Every day inside of Scripture, we find people who trusted the Lord to face darkness. David's song of praise here in 2 Samuel is a really powerful example of a man who stops and considers the Lord and recognizes and actually pens his thoughts on the Lord, the way the Lord makes him feel, and then the confidence he has to go and face darkness. So we hope that this podcast has been an encouragement for you to do that, especially this weekend. Go and face darkness, go and stand on truth, and go and celebrate kids. I want to thank you for listening to the Celebrate Kids podcast in this, our daily segment, Face in the Dark. Again, if you'd like to join Dr. Kathy and Celebrate Kids in this time, simply visit celebratekids.com/give. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook, my name is Wayne Stender. I want to say thanks for listening, and we're looking forward to seeing you here again on Monday.